Episode 1, Assault on Eddistone Point. Part 3, Scars. Eric pulled Mecken down behind the knot of horses, hissing at the others. Hide! Moments later, the hatch creaked open, and a boot appeared on the top rung. A cloaked figure started down the ladder, closing the hatch behind and shimmying down before going to the nearest pile of broken crates. Eric waved Mecken to follow, and circled the horses to approach from behind. Raising his spear, Eric poked it into the back of the humped form. Don't move. The person flinched, dropped the pieces of wood being pried off the crates, and began to visibly tremble. With exaggerated slowness, the little prisoner slowly pushed back the concealing hood, revealing a bald man with a wispy fringe of sandy hair. Mecken grabbed a handful of the old man's shirt, yanked him to his feet, and turned him around. Pulling him in close and brandishing his axe, he whispered, "You call out, you die." The man was brown and leathery from too much sun, the skin on his nose and pate mottled and peeling. He closed his watery eyes and started sobbing and shaking. "Please don't hurt me. They made me come here." Eric glanced up at the hatch before stepping aside and pointing with his spear. "Move. That way." Mecken shoved him ahead, and they followed him to the far side of the room, away from the ladder, where the others joined them. "Search him." Corb and Taven patted him down as Eric continued. "Who are you?" He shook visibly and swallowed. "Voro, sir." "Why are you here?" Taven reached under Voro's cloak and pulled a fine dagger from the back of the man's pants. Voro winced as it was handed over to Eric. "They took me on the road, made me carry and cook and all that. I found that here, sir. Thought it might come in handy if I was to be getting away." Eric tucked the dagger into his belt and pointed up the ladder. "How many are up there, and where are they?" Voro screwed up his face. 5, sir. 3 of them's right up there. They sleepin', and the other 2... Voro spat. "Nasty pair, them. Half-orcs, and used to murderin' means, if you understand me. They just went up top, said the signal mirror were damaged in the storm." Eric nodded. "And the prisoners?" Voro nodded in the direction of the hatch. "Right up there. Excepting that druid. Scaff and Ungern took him up to do the repairs." Mecken laid out a blanket, and they moved Harold away from the animals around the drain. "Can't linger here any longer. They might miss Voro and come looking. It's time we went up." They quickly made plans for taking the next floor, and gathered at the bottom of the ladder. Voro refused to go back up, and volunteered to look after Harold instead. Rennie sneered at the old man from across the room, whispering, "I don't like it. Eric, I don't trust him." Eric looked between the two. "Well, we can't drag him along, and we need everyone's help up there." Rennie shrugged and nodded, never taking her eyes off Voro. "Let's get this done, then." Eric went up the ladder first, easing the hatch open. The sound of snoring grew louder as he looked around. Waving the others to move, he opened the hatch the rest of the way and hurried up, followed quickly by Mecken. Tharsis passed Eric his spear and hurried up the ladder, followed by the twins. In the center of the room was a large iron stove, its smokestack angled away and exiting out a small hole in the wall. Along one side of the round room were 5 desks, one with a lit candle and a couple of open books on it. The other 4 were piled with packs, weapons, and dirty plates. Along the other side of the room were 5 beds. 4 of those beds were occupied, loud snoring coming from the nearest 2. Mecken nudged Eric and pointed across the room. Huddled up against a cleared spot of the wall were 3 men, all tied hand and foot. 2 of them leaned against each other, apparently asleep. The third man, dark-haired with streaks of gray, sat up staring intently at them. It was the old man on the horse they had seen in the druid's pool. Eric went to the prisoners. The dark-haired man fit the description they were given of the ranger that led Delia's party up the mountain. Eric knelt next to him, pulling the dagger the twins' father had given him. "You Shadowr?" he whispered as he saw it through the ropes. "Yes." Eric passed the blade to the ranger and pointed to the other 2. "Help them, and keep it quiet." Mecken stood over the beds, axe ready in case any of the bandits woke while Eric beckoned the others to him. Eric cocked an eye as they gathered. "Where's Ren?" As Tharsis and the twins looked around, Eric went to the hatch and knelt down. Rennie stood perfectly still a few strides from the ladder, her bow on the ground at her feet. Eric hissed her name, but she didn't respond. Wondering what she was looking at, he knelt and dipped his head into the opening to get a look at the room. Something floated on the far side of the room. Eric's mind raced to describe the shifting geometric pattern that hung suspended there. It reminded him of some of the complex wood joints his father had taught him when he didn't want to use glue or nails. Eric felt himself sliding deeper into the hypnotic pattern. But they had a job to do. People were depending on him. He didn't have time to figure this thing out. Eric wrenched his gaze away from the hypnotic image as his mind returned to him. Careful to avoid looking at the thing again, he climbed down the ladder. He reached her side just as the mysterious image flickered and collapsed on itself. Rennie took a deep, shuddering breath and swayed, putting a hand on Eric's shoulder to steady herself. Seeing her bow at her feet, she scooped it up from the floor, eyes darting around the room. It was an illusion. Eric shook his head, confused. Illusion? What was? Rennie pointed at the door to the tower. It stood wide open to the night. Voro, he's an illusionist. He didn't walk right for an old man. Then her disguise just melted away and she did something to me. I don't know what happened. Eric noticed one of the saddled horses near the door was gone. He went to the entrance and peered into the night. The plateau was empty. He shut the door. Voro would have to wait. Eric went back to the ladder and started up. We don't have time to chase him. Her. Come on. When they reached the second floor, they found the bandits completely subdued. Meccan and Shadower stood rubbing their knuckles. Two of the bandits lay on the floor next to the beds they had been sleeping in, blood dripping from broken noses and split lips. By the looks of the two, this hadn't been the first time those noses had been broken. The third bandit lay awake, eyes wide and hands up, with twin short swords at his throat. Eric looked the skinny lad up and down, doubting he was any older than they were. Shadower's fellow prisoners pulled rope from the packs piled on the desk and helped tie and gag the two unconscious bandits. The wiry old ranger waved Eric over to the fourth bed and pulled back the blanket. Lying there was a young woman with white hair. Her breathing was slow and shallow, and Eric shook her gently to rouse her. Shadower went to the desk with the lit candle and brought back a small corked vial of gray-green fluid. They started dosing her with this after they caught her sending messages. She hasn't woken up since. Eric took the vial and held it up to the light before passing it to Tharsis. Any idea what this is? Tharsis uncorked the vial and sniffed. I don't know. Some kind of sleep drought. Eric took the vial over to the last bandit. What is this? The young man shrugged and started to shake his head, but the sword points to either side of his throat made him think better of it. I don't know. The stuff is Veronia's. She's the one made her drink it. Eric scowled. Who's Veronia? He swallowed hard and squeaked. Wizard, she hired us. Eric nodded. Brown cloak? The boy nodded. We met already. Tie him up and make sure he can't make any noise. Tharsis nudged Eric and nodded at the vial in his hand. He looks thirsty. Eric gave a slight grin and handed the vial to Korib. He does. Help him out, boys. Korib uncorked the vial and held it to the young man's lips. The kid started to protest, but a little extra pressure from Tabin's sword cut off the complaint, and he opened his mouth. Korib emptied the container and tossed it away. The skinny bandit grimaced and swallowed before leering at them all. Scaff is going to eat you all for breakfast. He's going to... The lad's words trailed away as his eyes lost focus, and he fell into a deep sleep. Korib and Tabin sheathed their weapons as the two old men they had freed stepped in to tie up the last bandit. The nearer of the two bobbed his bald head to Eric and whispered urgently, I'm Clyde, sir. I'm not Alf. We help about the place. Alf looked up from tying the young man's ankles and waved before getting back to work. Clyde pointed up at the hatch to the next floor as he bound his wrists. They've got Cullivan up there somewhere. Please save him, sir. He's a good man. Eric put a hand on the old man's shoulder and nodded. We'll get him. But you three need to get out of here. Eric turned to Shadow. Harold is down below. He's hurt bad. Do what you can for him, but get him and these two back to Four Trails. Shadow's eyes went wide. Harold's alive? Eric nodded. Old Yosel is camped outside the town. Take him to Mim Grenna. She'll help him. And be careful. Veronia escaped. She's out there somewhere. Shadow sneered as he retrieved his gear from the pile on the desk. They ambushed us on the trail up the peak. Demons came rolling down the slope. By the time I realized they weren't real, most of us were dead or captured. But I know her tricks now. She won't get the jump on me a second time. Mecken carried Delia to the ladder and gently lowered her down to Clyde and Alf, while Shadowr pulled on his mail shirt and restrung his longbow. Shouldering his quiver and pack, he whispered to Eric, "You sure you don't need a hand up there? That's a rough pair if ever I seen one." Eric nodded. "I don't want anyone here at their mercy if we fail, and you're their best chance getting back to Four Trails if this lot comes after you. We hid some gear in the bushes near the platform at the foot of the mountain. There's food and water there." Tharsis handed the old ranger one of the 2 books that had been on the desk. "Delia will want this." Shadowr slid the tome into his leather vest. "Once they're safe in Four Trails, I'll be rounding up those of my brothers that haven't gone up north and coming back this way. If Scaff and Ungerd get the better of you, just know none of them will make it out of the range." The wiry old ranger offered Eric a firm hand and made for the ladder. When he was gone, Eric waved the crew, his crew, over and explained what little he knew of Veronia. Everyone had questions, but he waved them off. "We'll deal with Veronia later. It's time we finish this. They've got the druid up top somewhere. If we can get him away from them, we leave. If we can't, we fight." Hands tightened on weapons as everyone nodded grimly. Without another word, they moved to the ladder and started up, Eric first. When he reached the trapdoor, he put an ear to it before easing it open to scan the room. The once neat little kitchen, now in complete disarray, stood dark and empty. Waving the others up behind him, he hurried up the rest of the way and turned to help Mecken up before reaching back down so Tharsis could hand him his spear. Plucked feathers and broken plates littered the floor, and Eric was careful not to kick the shards around as he made his way across the room to the next ladder. Leaning his spear against the wall, he climbed the ladder and listened at the hatch again. He could hear someone talking. He couldn't tell what was being said, but the voice was gravelly, deep, and very unhappy. Eric waited for the others to assemble at the bottom of the ladder before easing the hatch open. Another dark room greeted them. Unlike the first floor, the crates here had not been disturbed. They lined the wall in neat stacks. A heavy iron crank sat just inside a large shuttered window on the south side, ready to haul any of the heavier supplies directly up to the storeroom. Eric looked up as another gruff shout sounded and froze. The hatch to the top of the tower was open, and a man stood staring down at them. As Eric watched, a burly arm snatched at the druid's robes and dragged him away from the opening. "Get to it, weakling!" Eric knelt to retrieve his spear with a shaky hand and waved them all to hurry up. The gravelly voice roared again as Horeb and Tabin came up the ladder last. "If this thing isn't fixed by dawn, I'll have Ungerd take that hammer to your teeth." A soft voice quavered, slow and strangely emphasized. "I'm almost done. I just need you 2 to stand there facing that way and hold this in place. This is our only spare lens. If you drop it, we can't fix the signal." The gravelly voice answered. "Watch your tongue with me, boy, or I'll take it out. Get on with it." Eric passed his spear to Tharsis again and hurried up the ladder, Mecken close behind. He poked his head up over the top and saw the 2 half-orcs standing with their backs to the hatch. Several torches flickered in the wind as the pair of bandits positioned something large and round between 2 wooden pillars, while a man in gray robes, Cullivan, tapped away at the brass fittings with his hammer. The druid glanced up nervously as Eric made the top, then bent back to his work, banging away louder than before. "Tilt it more. Bring this side up." Eric took Mecken's arm to help him up, but as Mecken stood to step away, his boot caught the raised lips set around the hatch to keep the rainwater out. His gauntlet made a horrible scraping sound on the stone as he caught himself. The 2 half-orcs jerked around at the noise. The smaller of the 2 pointed, shouting, "Ungerd, kill them!" With a bellow, the larger half-orc drew a short sword, charged Mecken, batting Eric aside with a massive arm as he went. Mecken got back on his feet, but only managed to partly draw his falchion before the half-orc was on him. The massive humanoid drove in hard for his groin, forcing him back as Mecken snatched at Ungerd's wrist to halt the blow. He stayed outside the reach of the notched sword as he leaned into the half-orc's push, but a quick left hook caught the priest and sent him stumbling to the side. Mecken felt a weight lift from his belt and heard the clatter of his falchion skidding away as he spun to face the brute once more. Eric took Ungerd's backhand on the shield, but didn't have his feet firmly beneath him, and the blow sent him sprawling. As he rolled over to get back up, he saw the smaller of the two half-orcs take up the sword and shield propped against the short parapet of the tower. Eric got to his feet in time to meet Scaff's savage chop, the heavy bastard sword biting through the iron rim and deep into the wood. Eric pushed his shield and the trapped sword up high, and went for his dagger as the half-orc tried to wrench his weapon free. Eric stabbed for the bandit's gut, but Scaff got a shield between them to intercept the blow. The long dagger hit the iron boss in the center and went straight through to the hilt. Scaff roared as the dagger pierced his arm and yanked Eric's shield from his grip before retreating a few steps. Eric withdrew the deadly weapon and stepped back as well. They both froze a moment, surprised at the damage it had done. As Scaff quickly inspected the wound to his forearm, Eric realized it wasn't his dagger. It was the one they had taken off Veronia. Scaff recovered first, stepped down hard on Eric's ruined shield, and wrenched his weapon free. Eric brought Veronia's dagger up and charged in as the half-orc freed his sword, determined to get inside the reach of the bandit's longer weapon. Meccan slapped away Ungerd's thrusts with a gauntleted fist, trying to buy time enough to draw his axe, but the blows came fast and hard, belly and chest, over and over. The half-orc was fast, and Meccan was being forced back along the inside of the tower's low wall until the half-orc pulled back for a hard thrust. Meccan brought up his gauntlet to block the blow to his chest, but Ungerd reversed his grip on the sword and slashed it across Meccan's belly, opening a deep wound just below his breastplate. Meccan reflexively jerked away from the blow, curling around the wound as Ungerd shouldered into him. He landed hard on his back, his head bouncing off the wet stone. Lights danced across the night sky as Meccan tried to get back up, but his arms and legs weren't responding. As he blinked away the confusion, he realized Ungerd was standing over him, sword raised high to end his life. The half-orc's growl rang in his ears, but the killing blow never came. Ungerd turned from Meccan and stepped away. The young priest rolled onto his side, clutching his wound, in too much pain to wonder about the hatchet sticking from the half-orc's back. Eric darted forward and struck as Scaff straightened. The half-orc intercepted the blow, and Voro's dagger pierced the shield again. But Scaff twisted it as the blade penetrated and flung the shield away, taking the blade with it. Scaff was taller than he was, but Eric was stronger. He couldn't allow the bandit room to bring his weapon into the fight, and drove in, punching the half-orc repeatedly in the face as he grappled for control of his sword. After several strikes, Scaff ducked his head into the next blow and took the hit on his forehead. Eric's knuckles crunched on the thick brow ridge, and his wrist rolled painfully. Scaff shoved him away and freed his sword arm from Eric's grip. As he pulled back to strike, a flash of blue light slammed into Scaff and knocked him off his feet. Eric recovered his footing as Tharsis appeared, pushing his spear into his hands. "Eric, take your pointy stick!" Eric took the spear and turned as Scaff roared and levered himself up into an awkward charge. Tharsis stepped away as the half-orc came on, hands working the air before him, and shot another magic missile. Eric brought up his arm to block the blinding flash, but the bandit was ready for the blow this time and grabbed one of the pillars supporting the signal mirror. The arcane bolt slammed into his chest, shredding what little remained of his shirt and rocking him back. But the half-orc growled through the pain and launched himself from the pillar and straight at the wizard. Eric leveled his spear and intercepted the half-orc, thrusting for his face to further unnerve the careening humanoid. Scaff batted the spear aside with his sword and reversed the swing into a slash across Eric's chest, but Eric took a long step back and thrust again. Scaff ducked aside enough to avoid a killing blow, but the spear opened a deep cut in his cheek. The half-orc bellowed as he slashed back and forth, aiming mostly for Eric's spear to keep him moving backward and the spear out of position to strike. The twins boiled up out of the hatch right behind Tharsis. They saw immediately that Meccan was in trouble as he retreated from the huge half-orc that struck at him. Even as they moved to help him, the big priest went down, clutching his belly. Tabin rushed ahead as Quarb pulled the pair of axes from his belt, and with a running hop, flung one at the bandit's broad back. It whipped past Tabin as he charged and embedded between his shoulder blades. The bandit grunted as the axe struck and turned at the sound of Tabin's rushing feet. He leapt as Ungerd spun around, sword aimed for his massive chest. The bandit knocked the blade wide with a quick, desperate swipe, but wasn't fast enough to avoid Tabin's knife. The dagger sunk in the elbow of his sword arm, and he cried out, dropping his weapon as the blow sliced through tendon and nerve. The half-orc reflexively tucked the injured arm in tight to his side as Tabin bounced off him like he would a brick wall, and the cry of pain hardened into a roar of anger. The big bandit brought up a massive boot and kicked Tabin in the chest as the little man backed away. Tabin flew back, his head striking one of the overflowing water barrels lining the wall, his sword tumbling away over the edge of the tower. Corb held on to his second axe, drew his own short sword, and charged in as the half-orc knocked his brother down. The bandit took up the dropped weapon with his uninjured arm, but Corb reached him before he could move on Tabin. Corb chopped and stabbed, circling around the humanoid and driving him from the edge and into the center of the tower, away from the two injured men. Tabin rolled over onto his hands and knees, disoriented and rubbing the back of his head. He checked his hand. No blood. That was good. He looked around. Everything was spinning. Meccan's falchion lay nearby. He'd probably want that back. Tabin picked up the heavy blade and looked around for Meccan. He lay nearby, a man in gray robes kneeling over him. Meccan was hurt. The bandits. Tabin snapped out of the daze he was in and got to his feet, growling away the pain in his head as he ran to help his brother. Corb was on the back foot now as Ungred hammered blows down on him. There was no finesse to the half-orc swings, just desperate savagery as the big humanoid drove him back. Corb saw Tabin get up and made sure Ungred's back was to him as his brother ran up and hacked at the back of the bandit's left thigh. With a howl, the half-orc went down to one knee, lashing out blindly in the direction the blow had come from. The short sword raked across Tabin's mailed chest as Corb leapt in close and buried his axe in the side of the half-orc's neck. Corb let go of the axe and jumped back as Ungred slashed at his knees. Tabin clutched at his chest a moment before realizing he wasn't hurt and quickly rejoined the fight. But it was already over. They circled the dying bandit, staying out of his reach as blood spurted from the mortal wound, and waited for the end. Rennie made the top right behind the twins and pulled her bow off her shoulder as a gout of flame lit the tower top. Tharsis, arms thrust before him, was pouring fire onto one of the half-orcs. As Rennie pulled an arrow, a fist shot from the flames and clipped Tharsis on the chin. The wizard's concentration broke, and the flames winked out as the tall man stumbled away from the blow. The badly burned half-orc wheeled back to Eric in time to intercept the spear lunging for his heart, and with a flourish, knocked it aside and resumed the attack, pressing the red-haired man back once more with a flurry of blows. Rennie took careful aim and loosed a shot. The arrow took the half-orc in the hip, staggering him and buying Eric enough time to take the offensive. The other bandit finally collapsed as Rennie drew another arrow and took aim, but Scaff maneuvered Eric between them and she held her shot. Alone in the fight now, and badly outnumbered, Scaff batted Eric's spear aside once more and turned to run for the ladder. But Meccan beat him there. The cleric grunted as his long axe sliced through the air. Scaff ducked, narrowly avoiding the deadly axe, and coiled to strike at Meccan's exposed armpit as the big cleric brought his axe around for another swing. Eric darted in and lunged as the bandit's sword drew back, his spear plunging deep into the half-orc's ribs. With a heave, Eric drove the bandit back towards the low wall. Meccan's axe crashed into the bandit's chest and ripped the spear out of his ribs as the blow pitched him backwards onto the wall. As Meccan and Eric tensed to strike again, Scaff slid off the far side. They rushed to the edge and leaned out as the bandit leader tumbled down the steep slope of the tower and disappeared into the night. Every muscle in Eric's body began to quiver as the tension of the battle wore off. He barely made it to the wall before his legs gave out, his spear the only thing keeping him from pitching forward. "I thought he'd killed you, Meccan." The priest lifted his shirt. A livid red scar showed where Ungred had cut him. "Twins got the bastard off me before he could finish the job, and the druid healed me." Cullivan went to Meccan's side as the big man swayed. "I did what I could, but you need to rest." Meccan nodded and sat next to Eric. Rennie joined them, guiding a dazed-looking Tharsis. The mage spat blood over the side of the tower before sitting on the other side of Eric. The tall man worked his jaw around before sticking a finger in his mouth and mumbling, "I think that dog knocked a tooth loose." Rennie took his chin in her hand and inspected the bruise forming there. "I think you'll live. Too bad there won't be a scar. Women love scars. Even in the dim light of the torches, they could all see Tharsis turn red. Eric straightened as he noticed the twins rolling over the dead bandit near the hatch. What are you two doing? Tabin cut a pouch free of the big half-orc's belt and shook it. When we get back, drinks are on us.